The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely of the creator and do not necessarily reflect the views and the opinions of the listener. Listener discretion is advised. Also, ChatGPT and AI bots were not used or harmed during the creating of this podcast. Hey guys, so in the last teaser where I left you off, I left you in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. We're kind of staying in Ohio with this story, but we're going to be like right on the border into West Virginia along the Ohio River. So before we go into all the weird stuff that happened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, we're going to take a little time leap back. We're going to talk about the cornstalks curse. Cornstalks curse. They have a disclaimer on this website, which I will have in the show description for you guys to find. It says cornstalk curse is not a source of Mothman. 50 years ago, Mothman flew into the imaginations of the residents of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, a small town in the western part of the state. For 13 months, eyewitnesses recall seeing a 7-foot-tall, red-eyed winged creature. Though it never threatened anyone, its size was menacing, of course. Mothman may have snatched a German Shepherd. I mean, it's pretty big. Other than that, it did not kill or maim. It merely just fascinated. To understand the Mothman phenomena, one must look at the possible explanations as to why a creature would appear in an isolated part of a small state. One such explanation could be the cornstalks curse. One local legend states that a chief of the Shawnee Indian placed a curse on the area as he lay dying from multiple gunshot wounds. His name was translated loosely to maize plant or cornstalk. This Native American of the Shawnee Indians was gunned down at Fort Rudolph in 1777. Some claim that his last words were to place a curse upon the land where he was murdered. Mothman is not a coincidence of a curse. Indeed, it is doubtful cornstalk cast a curse at all. So, they're saying where this Native American, passed away, he placed a curse upon the land. Today, he is referred to as Cornstalk. Records of Cornstalk's birth do not exist. His birth is estimated to be between 1720 and 1735, possibly in Ohio. Eventually, he was ascended to chief and led raids to keep the British out of Ohio. Fort Rudolph was built as an outpost near the Tun-Indiwi, or translated to mingling of the waters, or where the two rivers meet. The Battle of Point Pleasant commenced on October 10, 1774, between the militia of the Virginia and the Shawnee and the Mingo tribes. A peace treaty was signed, and the battle ended. The Revolutionary War impeded peace. 3 years later, Cornstalk returned to the fort to alert soldiers of impending raid. Soldiers held Cornstalk, his son, and other Indians from the Shawnee tribe. After a Virginia soldier was killed, the soldiers inside the fort turned on Cornstalk and his entourage. He was murdered on November 10, 1777. In 1794, the town was officially chartered as Point Pleasant. Initially, he was buried at the fort. In 1840, his grave was unearthed for a street. Few artifacts, mostly 3 teeth and 15 bone fragments, were entered in the aluminum tin can at the county courthouse. Finally, in 1954, the Mason County Courthouse was razed and the remains were re-entered at the Tun-Awi, or the Meeting of the Waters Park. None of the credible historic accounts of Cornstalk's life and death mentioned a curse. So was there a curse? Highly doubtful. However, this does not make people not think about this. Supposedly, the curse was to last 200 years, therefore ending in 1977. Believers identify several unique events as proof of the curse's existence. These include floods, airline crashes, and Mothman. Disaster records only show events beginning in 1907. Did the curse lay dormant for 130 years? Doubtful. In fact, the events are not truly unique. West Virginia sits on a coal country. The coal was discovered in West Virginia in 1742. The first commercial coal mine opened in 1810. 53 of the 55 West Virginia counties have coal deposits. Of those, 43 mineable coal. Today the coal was only mined in 28 counties. In 1907, Monongahela, I'm not very good at pronouncing things, coal mining accident claimed 316 lives. It remains the deadliest U.S. coal mining accident. Unfortunately, this place is 3 hours away from Point Pleasant. It's not remotely close to the land where Cornstalk was murdered. Therefore, this incident was not caused by the curse. Few people point to the couple of floods in West Virginia as being a direct result of the curse. They specifically cite the floods of 1913 and 1937. West Virginia has experienced large-scale flooding. However, the floods in 1913 and 1937 were neither the largest nor the deadliest within 200 years prior that curse was supposedly covered. The second deadliest flood occurred in August 9, 1916, at Cabin Creek and Coal River valleys. Early reports claim the number of deaths may have reached as high as 150 people. According to Google Maps, Cabin Creek is an hour and 15 minutes away from Point Pleasant, therefore not part of the Cornstalk curse. So this website I'm going to have on the show link is about all the tragedies that have happened, but they're saying it's not connected to the Cornstalk curse. I'm only mentioning this because the Cornstalk curse was mentioned inside the gift shop at the Mothman Museum. Nowhere else but the gift shop, which I thought was kind of neat. Alright, so if we're talking about Mothman, we're going to have to talk about how he was first sighted. So on November 12th, 1966, in Clendenin, West Virginia, a group of gravediggers working in a cemetery spotted something strange. They glanced up from their work as something huge soaring over their heads. It was a massive figure that was moving rapidly from tree to tree. The gravediggers would later describe this figure known as the brown human being. Okay. Just 3 days after the gravediggers' initial report, in nearby Point Pleasant, West Virginia, two couples noticed a white-winged creature about 6 or 7 feet tall standing in front of the car where they were all sitting in. Eyewitness Roger Scarberry and Steve Mallett told the local paper, the Point Pleasant Register, that the beast had bright red eyes, about 6 inches apart, a wingspan about 10 feet, and apparently he urged to avoid the bright headlights of a car. According to the witnesses, this creature was able to fly at an incredible speed, perhaps as fast as 100 miles per hour. All of them agreed that the beast had a clumsy runner on the ground. So he was clumsy running on the ground, but he was incredibly fast in the air. They knew this only because it allegedly had chased their vehicles to the outskirts of their town in the air, and then scuttled into a nearby field and disappeared. Knowing how absurd this must have sounded to the local paper in a small Appalachian community in the 1960s, Scarberry insisted that the apparition couldn't have been a figment of his imagination. He assumed the paper, "If I had seen it all by myself, I wouldn't have said anything, but there was 4 of us who saw it," unquote. The statue of the infamous Mothman is in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and let me tell you folks, it is glorious. his shiny metal ass and all. Just glorious. If you ever get a chance, you need to stop by Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and see the Mothman statue and the awesome little museum that they have there. So, that's pretty much the story of Mothman. Now, when I went to the museum myself, I was more intrigued about all of the UFO sightings. Like, there were hundreds of newspaper clippings just about UFO sightings. The museum is definitely dedicated to Mothman. I'm not saying that it isn't all about Mothman, but it does make you wonder if there's logical explanations to what Mothman could have been. What if he was just a big barn owl? Because I've seen barn owls in Ohio. They're pretty big and they stand pretty tall up to a car. They're pretty graceful in the air and pretty clumsy on the ground. So it could have been a barn owl or it could have been a crane. Cranes are huge. They have pretty big wingspans. So if we're going to talk about Mothman, we also have to talk about the UFO stuff that goes with it. Now, my main focus on going to the Mothman Museum was to see if they had anything on Indrid Cold. They had one thing on Indrid Cold, and it was an old tape behind glass of the interview of Woodrow Derenberger, who saw Indrid Cold. I'm going to play a little clip for you to introduce Indrid Cold, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of this episode.
In the world of paranormal encounters, few names are as shrouded in mystery and fear as Indrid Cold, aka the Grinning Man. Believed to be an otherworldly being, Cold has been the subject of countless sightings and reports over the years. But who is Indrid Cold, and what makes him so terrifying? According to witnesses, Cold is a tall, thin figure with an unnerving grin and eyes that seem to glow in the dark. He is often associated with UFO sightings and strange phenomena, leading some to believe that he may be an extraterrestrial or interdimensional being. Despite numerous accounts of Indrid Cold's sightings, his true identity and intentions remain a mystery. Some believe he is a friendly visitor from another world, while others fear he may be a malevolent entity with sinister motives. Check out the long-form YouTube video on my channel for more information.
We will also include that link in the podcast description. For several months toward the end of 1966, the eyes of the world were focused on West Virginia, specifically on Point Pleasant. Scores of people all reported seeing something similar. This creature became known as the Mothman. All of this seemed to lead to a terrible disaster when the Silver Bridge collapsed. All of this diminished headlines and newspapers. However, buried deep inside the pages of the press were claims of another bizarre sighting that was overshadowed by both Mothman and the Silver Bridge. His name was Indrid Cold, also known as the Grinning Man, and this figure has earned a reputation in American folklore that persists to this day. Woodrow Derenberger made his living selling sewing machines. November 2nd, 1966 was a long day for him. By 7 p.m., he was driving along the hill just outside of Parkersburg on Interstate 77 and was looking forward to arriving at home. On this cold and wet evening, the last thing he wanted was to have to stop on the side of the road and replace a sewing machine that had become dislodged from the back of his vehicle. The sewing machine was undamaged and he quickly resituated it. Derenberger might have parked a little bit better, but he left enough room for other commuters to pass by his sanitation vehicle while he tended to his business. None of these drivers came forward to confirm Darren Berger's account of what followed. Having returned to the driver's seat on his van, he continued on his way. A set of headlights passed him and began to slow down in front of him. For the second time, Darren Berger had to stop. This time, he had to do so in the middle of the road, careful not to dislodge any other appliances in his van. Woodrow was driving conservatively and likely not driving anywhere near the speed limit. Despite this, his first thought centered on a patrol car and possibly a sobriety test. He quickly dismissed this conclusion when he realized that he was not looking at a car at all. Whatever this was, it was shaped much like an old-fashioned kerosene lamp, with a central bulge and flared edges. A door slid open, and a man exited. According to Darren Berger, this man was average in many ways. He had a deep tan, and his hair was dark and it was swept back. A deep tan was unusual for that time of year, in November, but this extraordinary broad grin that this man wore was easily the most striking thing about his appearance. As soon as the man exited, he began to head towards Darren Berger's way. As the distance shortened, Darren Berger noted that this man had a dark overcoat on, and beneath that he wore a metallic-looking uniform that was green and glistened in the limelight. This man's arms were folded, and both sets of his knuckles seemed nestled within his own armpits. The man spoke. He identified himself as Indrid Cold, and he said that he had come from a place less powerful than the United States. He was very reassuring and admitted that he was flesh and blood just like Woodrow and was in no way special or spectacular. Indrid also openly encouraged Woodrow to report the encounter to the authorities, and confirmation would follow. Before he returned to his vehicle, Indrid revealed that this would be just for the first of several such meetings the pairs would have. The whole message was delivered by something similar to telepathy, and not a single word was spoken verbally. Both Indrid Cold and the vehicle departed the scene. Woodrow Darren Berger was not the only person to report an appearance from a sinister-looking, grinning man. On the very same night, on the very same road, 2 other men saw an elongated object land in front of their vehicle. They were also forced to stop, and as they watched as the man disembarked and headed their way. He wore a dark coat and folded arms in such a way that could be considered uncomfortable. He asked both men questions and seemed pointless to them before the man returned back to the craft and sequentially took off. Indrid Cold did keep to his word. Woodrow received several additional visits from the same man. On some of these sequential visits, Indrid was not alone. Darren Berger revealed that his new friends came from a planet called Lanlos, Lanulos, and that during one visit he was allowed to take the trip there. After the last of these meetings, Woodrow sought out a renowned UFO investigator named John Keel, who happened to write a book called The Mothman Prophecies, and reported the events in great detail. Purportedly, during Keel's investigation, he often received mysterious phone calls from someone calling himself Indrid Cold. This was nothing new for him, of course, but he did mention the person did not have a person-type feel to it. Neil believed that whoever phoned him was an informant of a third party. Despite this, Keel wrote a foreword in Darren Berger's book, Visitors from Lanlos. They also have this book and a bunch of stuff about John Keel displayed at the Mothman Museum, but just the one thing about Indrid Cold, which is strange to me. Several weeks before Darren Berger's had his encounter, a pair of boys met a man that scared both of them to death. The boys, James Yadis and Martin Mouse Monov, were both walking home along the 4th Street in Elizabeth, New Jersey. They reached a corner opposite of the local landmark called the Turnpike. This was an elevated area with high wire fencing and steep inclines. They reported that behind the fence stood the strangest man they ever saw. Neither had any idea of how the man got there or where the man came from. And the man just stood there, grinning this big grin. There are other versions of the legend involving other sightings. However, not much else has ever been heard of the grinning man since the 1960s. Who was he? Nobody knows. It's just kind of strange, isn't it? So, my opinion with Indrid Cold and the Mothman. I do think they are, if they're alien, they're related. Like, what if Mothman was Indrid Cold's pet and he lost his pet Mothman? Who knows? It's just very strange how they happened, very close together. So, if we're going to talk about Mothman and Indrid Cold, of course, we're going to have to talk about the Men in Black, too. So, here come the Men in Black, folks. Here they come. Alright, so, a group of mysterious figures who have been reported to visit people who have had encounters with UFOs or other paranormal phenomena. Their behavior is often described as strange, and they have been known to intimidate witnesses into remaining silent about their experiences. Alright. Mysterious strangers that reported to tempt and threaten witnesses. Now, they do have a picture of a Men in Black supposedly at the Mothman Museum. They have this whole little section dedicated to the Men in Black. Pretty strange photo, if you ask me. Kind of looks like a Blues Brother just standing on a street corner. But this was also in the 1960s when the Men in Black appeared on the streets of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Some were reported having dark features as a European will look, expressionless faces, and strange eyes, sometimes covered by dark sunglasses. Their movements often appeared to be inhuman in nature. They usually travel in groups of 2s or 3s and have a knack for knowing things about witnesses that they have taunted. Things that only the witnesses knew. There were even reports of them being masters of illusion by ways of being able to make themselves appear and disappear without a trace. Some have reported them carrying sophisticated gadgets, and one woman claimed that the Men in Black erased part of her memory. Okay. That's pretty creepy if you ask me. So, if there was a bunch of UFO sightings, and we're talking hundreds of them, because I saw the newspaper clippings at the museum, of course there's going to be some Men in Black activity. So as we close out on this episode, we are going to read a couple of stories from you, the listeners. First story is from B, friend of the show. She had a strange encounter on her way home from work, right outside of Hillsboro, right at sunset. She said that she saw 2 dogs that had leashes like they were lost. So she put her hazard lights on, and as soon as she put her hazard lights on and got out of her vehicle, the dogs were nowhere to be found. Like they just disappeared. And then she became had this sense of overwhelming danger, impending doom, like she was being watched, and she just got in her car and left. The next story that we have is friend of the show, Stacy. I had one just recently. Many of you know I almost lost my brother on February 5th due to busting esophageal varices. He was bleeding more than they could put blood into him. They managed to put 70 units of blood into him that night, and they did a TIP procedure, and he was in a coma for a week. When he woke up, the first thing he said, He was sitting, sorry, just trying to read along with her. When he woke up, the first thing he said was he seen red butterflies when he was actively dying. I googled that, and it meant that a soul is with you. And that same morning, right before I got to the hospital, and right before he woke up, I heard my grandma's voice, who just passed away that October, unexpectedly say, "Stace, I was there." That one gave me goosebumps. Alright, so the last story that I have to share has something to do with UFOs in Ohio. Hi, I used to live at a low-income housing apartment where you weren't allowed to smoke cigarettes inside your apartment. So at the end of the night, a few of us neighbors were outside having our last cigarette smoke before heading to bed. When we all kind of were looking up at the stars, then all of a sudden the stars got blocked out by a big black triangle shape that was quiet, but you could tell it was there. Sorry, I'm reading along here. The space was huge, enough to cover up the entire parking lot. And as it passed over the apartment complex, it was followed by 3 military helicopters following it. That's pretty spooky too. And if you or someone you know has a story of creepy, strange, or paranormal in Ohio or in the surrounding states around Ohio, please email me with your story or video clip at underthemoonparapod@gmail.com, and I will read your story on the show. So, with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And if you ever want to help spread the word, share the show with a friend. It always helps to share. So I thank you guys for listening to this episode, and I hope you really enjoyed it because I put a lot of research and thought into it. And we'll catch you underneath the next full moon with our next strange topic. So thanks for listening, and always remember, stay spooky, my friends. Thanks for listening. Make sure to join us under the next full moon for the next spooky tale of Under the Moon, Ohio Paranormal Legends.